Welcome to this video. In this video, we will review Make It Stick by Peter Brown, Henry Roediger III, and Mark Daniel. If you are someone that likes to read, then I would classify you as a person that has high intellectual curiosity and is interested in learning theory. Our magnificent brains fire electrochemical signals that enable us to read, write, speak, perform tasks, play instruments, construct engineering feats, and just about everything that we do as humans. Make It Stick is a book that deconstructs the learning science to help readers retain more of what they read and to learn. I cannot remember if I was ever taught how to learn in a class. Actually, I don't think most people have ever really been taught how to learn properly. Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel provide the reader with data-driven and case-based approaches to improve learning and memory. Think of this book as a practical treatise in learning pedagogy. I have been in numerous situations where I needed to learn and then present complex scientific information and publications in a very short period of time. And sometimes I forgot to say what I wanted to say, or I didn't elaborate in the way that I had thought about it or taken notes. And I wish there was a secret to reading something once and then knowing it forever. You know, a magical land where the fairies pour information and wisdom into your brain and it sticks forever. That is wishful thinking because memory doesn't work like that, as most people know. My main reason for making a video on this book is a little bit self-serving, but I would love it if it also helps my viewers. I wanted a video that I can revisit periodically that reminds me about learning techniques that help elevate or at least maintain my cognitive faculties. I like having the ability to reason and to do arithmetic, and I hope that stays in all my years, especially as I age. And even though I've had this book for several years now, when I randomly flip through it, most of the time I exclaim, I totally forgot about that, when I see some concept. So based on that, this will be a video that I will watch frequently to remind myself on things that I should be doing to learn more effectively. And I hope that you will do that too. Memory versus learning. Even though memory and learning are intertwined, it's very easy to conflate these two concepts. Memory is not the same as learning. Learning is the acquisition of new knowledge or skills from experience, and it's a complex process. Memory, on the other hand, is our ability to store and recall past experiences in various ways. In contrast, learning is the acquisition of new information and abilities. So without memory, there would be no learning because you would be unable to recall that information. So therefore, memory is often a proxy for learning. It's how we know that people have learned. And I don't think memory is a perfect proxy for learning, but it is a pretty good indicator. My memory is better with concepts that I have seen many times and that I understand deeply. And there are times when my memory has failed me because when I look back, I didn't truly understand those concepts, or I wasn't able to connect the dots to a larger framework. And also, some things are easier for me to learn than others. Brain anatomy. The authors didn't review brain anatomy in the book, but let's do a brief review of the gross organization of the brain. Much of what we know about the human brain comes from the work of neuroscientists who research and document the biological substrates of the mind. The brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system, or the CNS. The brain is divided into left and right cerebral hemispheres. Each cerebral hemisphere is further divided into 4 lobes: the left and right frontal lobe at the front, the occipital lobes at the back, the parietal lobes at the top, and the temporal lobes on the left and right behind your ears. The cerebral cortex is an outer mantle of gray matter that covers the left and right cerebral hemispheres. Think of the cortex as the seat of the mind. The 2 hemispheres are specialized for distinct cognitive and behavioral functions. The right cerebral cortex regulates movement of the left side of the body, and the left cerebral cortex regulates movement of the right side of the body. The inherent anatomical asymmetries of the cortex explain how approximately 90% of people are right-handed. And depending on these inherent anatomical asymmetries of the cortex, a person can exhibit functional asymmetries in mathematical abilities, in spatial and facial recognition. The limbic system of the brain allows for learning, memory, and emotion, all of which influence executive function. Some structures of the limbic system include the hippocampus. When we first learn new explicit information, the memory depends critically on the hippocampus. So even though memory is gradually consolidated in the cortex over time, initially when you learn something, the hippocampus reactivates the appropriate patterns in different regions of your cerebral cortex. The amygdala is another structure of the limbic system, which is located under the cerebral cortex at the temporal pole of the brain and is known to be involved in the processing of emotions such as fear and emotional memory. The prefrontal cortex plays an important role in cognitive control, such as the ability to orchestrate thought and action in accordance with internal goals, and also contributes to our ability to prioritize behavior and to adapt to change. Even though the adult brain represents approximately 2% of body weight, it consumes about 20 to 23% of whole body energy requirements, mostly in the form of glucose or sugar. We've heard about the keto diet, which is all the rage now. The brain also uses ketones as the only significant backup fuel for glucose, such as when a person is fasting or on a ketogenic diet. The two ketones that replace glucose for the brain are beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate. We also know that both the uptake and metabolism of glucose by the brain deteriorates in patients with Alzheimer's disease. Ketogenic diets are an area of research for Alzheimer's disease. Moreover, top performers and entrepreneurs are incorporating fasting or intermittent fasting to enhance their brain function with either endogenous or exogenous ketones. We also know that exercise helps brain performance. A naturally occurring compound called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotropic factor, is upregulated with exercise and has an absolute effect on cognition and on lessening depression. So tip number 1, fasting and exercising maximizes your learning and memory abilities. Experiential learning. I'm often surprised how hard it is to learn new motor skills in the beginning. This includes periods of frustration and confusion when I'm in that novice stage at the beginning. I only become very happy with myself later on when I've practiced a skill enough that I become quite good at it. Some examples of new skills I learned this year where I was not so good in the beginning, but quickly got better with some diligent practice. So that includes learning how to ice a layer cake in buttercream, or applying fondant to a cake, or even doing bridal henna designs. Go ahead, search those terms and watch the videos on tutorials. It looks very easy, but it isn't easy to grasp until you do the practice. Explicit knowledge is knowledge about a skill. This is essentially book knowledge and verbalized instructions on how to perform a skill. For example, watching YouTube videos on how to cook or how to play the piano or sport. The experiential part requires implicit procedural memory. We know this as muscle memory. Executing a skill and talking about a skill are two separate things, and that takes practice and time. Tip number 2, when learning a new skill, watching or reading about it won't help you actually do it. Instead, invest your time to actually practice the skill. Retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is to quiz yourself and therefore interrupt forgetting. Learning is an active process. The best learning happens when the learning process is difficult because effortful learning builds new connections and capabilities in the brain. When you self-quiz yourself or take tests on building something you've read or learned, you see what you truly know. In other words, self-quizzing is a demonstration of your past learning, even when you have a hard time answering these quiz questions. Also, do your retrieval practice in a spaced repetition fashion. So as you recall information over time, you re-encode that information and you deepen your understanding of the subject matter. And importantly, there are some common things that we do that end up being illusions of knowing that the authors describe in this book, such as highlighting, underlining, and rereading text. I have done all these things and I have fallen prey to the illusion of knowing myself. These three things do not increase our learning abilities. The tip number 3, quiz yourself on information you've read or learned at regular intervals. Flashcards are a great tool for this, and just know that you will get better over time. Interleaving. Cramming or mass practice, which means doing the same thing many times in a block, is not as effective as spacing your practice sessions over time. So this means study one text once or twice, then read another text, and then come back and revisit the first text. This applies also on how we learn even in a single session. So rereading is an illusion of understanding, as we just previously alluded to. So when you interleave, meaning you space your practice sessions and read different subjects, it forces you to retrieve that information from your long-term memory when you revisit it. So tip number 4, space your practice sessions and mix up your subjects. Identify gaps. This example is not from the book, but I think it's an important one. A strategic way to learn is to identify gaps in your understanding of a subject and then to set about systematically to fill those gaps. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you're reading an academic paper, say, you can use one colored pen to note sections of the paper or vocabulary that you're not familiar with, and then set about to find the definitions of those terms and make notes on the paper. So then you can see from that color just how much you know or don't know from the paper. So tip number 5, identify gaps in your understanding. Sleep. As we previously discussed, the hippocampus is an integral part of the brain for learning and memory because this is where we generate new neurons. Sleep deprivations, both during REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement, and stage 4 sleep, may reduce how many new neurons we build in our hippocampus after learning and disrupts the ability of those cells to develop into mature cells. So when we do not develop neurons and allow them to mature, we are impeding our memory capabilities. So tip number 6, get adequate sleep and take naps after learning something new. I just love napping. Elaboration. Elaboration is another technique they talk about in this book to relate the new information to something that you already know. For example, you can use metaphors and analogies. I find presenters at conferences that use metaphors and analogies when describing complex topics so much more engaging. The process of elaboration is just simply great for making connections and helping your audience or even yourself grasp new information much more deeply. So tip number 7, use metaphors and analogies to explain complex topics. Calibration. Calibration means to check yourself to see if you're not trapped in a cognitive illusion. This means fooling yourself into thinking that you really know what you know. I find this one of the most important tools for me when I plan a presentation. I generally make notes on my slides that I want to cover, and then I do a practice run without looking at any notes to see which points I know and remembered. So tip number 8, seek objective feedback in the form of practice runs. Seek reliable sources of information. We want to ensure we learn the right information. Therefore, seek information that is as reliable and unbiased. This means consider the source and consider the evidence. Also, solicit different perspectives on the same topic. Tip number 9, think critically about the source and the evidence. Summary of tips. Fasting and exercise maximize your learning and memory. When learning a new skill, watching or reading about it won't help you actually do it. Instead, invest your time to practice the skill. Quiz yourself on information frequently. Space your practice sessions and mix up your subject matter. Identify gaps in your understanding. Get adequate sleep and take naps after learning something new. Use metaphors and analogy to explain complex topics and to connect the dots. Seek objective feedback in the form of practice runs. And finally, think critically about the source and the evidence. Final thoughts. This book has many case studies and advice from professionals and students alike. Those alone have dozens of pieces of wisdom. I highly recommend you read the book just for those alone. There are other things that I do to support my learning and memory that were not presented in this book, and hopefully I'll have the occasion to discuss those in another video. Well, I hope this video was of educational value to you and that, like me, you will revisit this periodically. If you implement some of the techniques, please let me know in the comment section. I would love to hear. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.